Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations of Sand. Thaddeus Rook Blackwell stood at his office window, watching Seattle's skyline disappear behind sheets of rain. At 52, he commanded respect without asking for it. The result of 20 years in military intelligence, followed by building Sentinel Solutions, a private security firm that protected the wealthy and powerful across the Pacific Northwest. Rook checked his watch. 5 hours until his only son's wedding. The thought brought a complicated mixture of pride and unease. His relationship with Liam had always been strained. Too many absences during his formative years, too much similarity in their stubborn personalities. His phone vibrated. Cody Reeves, his head of operations and former military colleague. "Everything's set for today," Rook asked. "Just checking if you need backup at the wedding," Cody replied. "Between your son's political connections and Vivian's family wealth, it's quite the security circus." "I'm capable of surviving one day of small talk," Rook said with a hint of amusement, "though I might prefer an extraction mission in hostile territory." After hanging up, Rook unlocked his desk drawer and withdrew a small box containing his father's cufflinks. They were simple silver squares with tiny embedded sapphires, the only inheritance from a man who died when Rook was just 14. As he closed the drawer, his eye caught the framed photo from their family vacation to Maui 4 years ago. Vivian, still beautiful at 48, her arm around Liam. Their daughter Paige, 23 now and in her final year of law school, rolling her eyes at something Rook had said. A perfect family portrait that concealed the hairline fractures beneath. Rook's marriage to Vivian Lawson had begun as a whirlwind romance 28 years ago. The daughter of a banking executive, she'd been volunteering at the military hospital where Rook was recovering from a mission gone wrong. Her warmth had pierced through his defenses, and within 6 months, they were married. They'd built a life that looked enviable from the outside. The renovated Craftsman in Queen and Hill, the vacation home on Whidbey Island, 2 accomplished children, and social connections throughout Seattle's elite circles. But somewhere in the past decade, they'd begun orbiting different suns. Vivian had thrown herself into the arts community, serving on museum boards and fundraising committees. Rook had focused on expanding his business, often working 16-hour days. They still shared meals and attended functions together, but the electric current that had once run between them had dimmed to a flicker. He closed his office and drove home to change for the wedding. The ceremony would be held at Ridgemont Gardens, followed by a reception at the Lawson family estate. 300 guests, including 2 state senators and a federal judge, all connections from Vivian's side and Liam's budding political career. When Rook arrived home, the house was strangely quiet. Vivian's car was in the garage, but she wasn't in their bedroom or her study. Probably at the venue already, handling last-minute details. She'd always been a perfectionist, especially when it came to appearances. As he showered and dressed, Rook mentally prepared himself for the day ahead. He was genuinely happy for Liam, even if he found his son's fiancée Madison a bit calculated in her ambitions. The girl came from old Seattle money and had her sights set on supporting Liam's political future. She reminded Rook too much of the political wives he'd encountered during his intelligence days, women who smiled while carrying switchblades in their silk purses. Rook adjusted his tie in the mirror, studying the lines time had carved around his eyes. He still maintained the physical discipline of his military days, but the gray at his temples had fully claimed his dark hair. Vivian once said it made him look distinguished. Recently, she hadn't commented on his appearance at all. His phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. "Don't go to your son's wedding. Check your wife's room." Rook stared at the message, his pulse steady. 25 years of intelligence work had taught him to process surprises without reaction. Probably someone's idea of a joke, or a wrong number. Still, as he finished dressing, the message nagged at him. Vivian didn't have a separate room. Strictly speaking, though she had converted the guest suite at the end of the hall into her creative space a few years back, when her insomnia had worsened. "Just need somewhere to read or sketch without disturbing you." she'd explained. Rook had understood. After decades of light sleeping from training and field work, he noticed every movement, every change in breathing pattern beside him. He checked his watch again. Still 3 hours before he needed to leave. Plenty of time to prove to himself that the message was nonsense. Walking down the hallway, Rook felt an odd sensation he hadn't experienced in years. The heightened awareness before entering unknown territory. At his wife's door, he paused, then turned the handle. The door was unlocked. As it swung open, Rook found himself frozen on the threshold, processing the scene before him. The words, "I was speechless," wouldn't begin to describe what he felt. Chapter 2. The Revelation. Rook stood motionless in the doorway, his military training the only thing keeping him from reacting visibly to the scene before him. Vivian's creative space had been transformed into what could only be described as a shrine to another life, a life he knew nothing about. The large corkboard that once held her sketches and museum announcements now displayed dozens of photographs. Vivian with a man Rook recognized as Barrett Lancaster, the new director of the Seattle Arts Foundation. The photos chronicled what appeared to be years of meetings, dinners, intimate moments in places Rook had never been with his wife. Some showed them in Paris, where Vivian had supposedly gone for a museum board retreat. Others on a beach that looked like the Amalfi Coast from a women's cultural tour the previous spring. But what truly rendered him speechless was the evidence of careful planning laid out on Vivian's desk. Property listings for a villa in Provence. 2 first-class plane tickets to France dated for 3 weeks after Liam's wedding. Financial documents showing a recently opened account in Vivian's maiden name, containing just over $2.3 million, roughly half the liquid assets he thought they shared. And most damning of all, divorce papers, already drawn up but not yet filed, laying out terms that would leave Rook with his business, but little else of the life they'd built together. 28 years reduced to calculated legal paragraphs and secret rendezvous. Rook's phone vibrated again. The same unknown number. Now you know. She's planning to tell you after the wedding. Lancaster will be there today. They couldn't resist one last public performance. Watch how they look at each other. Rook moved methodically around the room, photographing everything with his phone. His mind had shifted into operational mode, the same detached efficiency that had kept him alive behind enemy lines. He examined the divorce documents closely. They'd been prepared by Elliot Vance, one of the city's most aggressive divorce attorneys. The document was dated 3 months ago, but had sections recently annotated in Vivian's elegant handwriting. Rook found her personal laptop open on the small writing desk. A quick check revealed she'd been sloppy with security. No password required after sleep mode. Her email was open, displaying a long thread with Lancaster. From Barrett Lancaster to Vivian Blackwell subject. After Saturday. V. Everything's arranged for our departure. The real estate agent will meet us at Charles de Gaulle, then take us directly to the property. I've spoken with the board, and they're willing to create a satellite position for me to manage European acquisitions. We'll have everything we've dreamed of for the past 5 years. Just a few more days of pretending. You were right to wait until after Liam's wedding. Once that's done, you can finally break free of the prison you've been living in. Rook never appreciated your spirit, your passion. He's been too consumed with his shadowy business to notice the magnificent woman beside him slowly withering away. I count the hours until we can stop hiding. Oh, my love, B. Rook felt something cold and calculated settle in his chest. Not just anger, something more dangerous. The calculated precision that had once made him legendary in military intelligence circles began to hum through his veins. He copied the emails to his secure server, then proceeded to Vivian's closet. Inside, he found a small locked safe he'd never seen before. Using the skills that had once been his professional stock in trade, he had it open within minutes. Inside was a leather-bound journal. The entries dated back 5 years, shortly after Barrett Lancaster had arrived in Seattle to take up his position at the Arts Foundation. Rook read selected passages, each one driving the knife deeper. April 18th, Barrett understands me in ways Rook never has. When I speak about art, about beauty, about the life I dreamed of before I surrendered to being a military wife, and then a security contractor's trophy. Barrett's eyes light up. He doesn't check his watch or nod absently. August 3rd, we crossed the line today. I should feel guilty, but all I feel is alive for the first time in years. Rook is so observant about everyone except the people closest to him. He'll never notice the change in me. December 25th. Another Christmas of expensive gifts that show how little he knows me. Barrett gave me a first edition of Rilke's poetry. He remembers everything I tell him. I'm living a double life, and the sad truth is that my real life is the secret one. The most recent entry was from just 1 week ago. June 10th. 7 days until Liam's wedding. Then 3 weeks until my new life begins. I feel some regret about Paige. She's always been her father's daughter, and she'll likely choose his side. But Liam will understand eventually. He's seen how empty my marriage has become. Barrett suggested we tell Rook the day after the wedding. A small mercy to avoid ruining Liam's day. I agreed, though part of me wants to see Rook's face when his perfect world collapses. He's always been so arrogantly certain, so convinced of his own infallibility. For once, the great Thaddeus Blackwell will be the one blindsided. Rook replaced everything exactly as he'd found it, closed the safe, and exited the room. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall for just a moment, the only outward concession to the earthquake that had just devastated the landscape of his life. His phone vibrated once more. "What will you do now, Rook?" "The choice is yours." This time, Rook replied, "Who is this?" The answer came almost immediately. "Someone who respects you too much to let you be played for a fool. I'll be at the wedding. Find me if you want to know more." Rook checked the time. 2 hours until the ceremony. His son's wedding day, a day that should be about new beginnings, not devastating endings. The strategist in him began to calculate, to formulate contingencies. The father in him thought of Liam and Paige. The husband in him felt something dying, replaced by a cold resolve that those who knew him well would recognize as his most dangerous state. Rook straightened his tie, squared his shoulders, and walked to his study. He had calls to make before the wedding. Chapter 3. The Wedding. The Ridgemont Gardens glowed with thousands of fairy lights as the Seattle summer evening settled over the manicured grounds. 300 of Seattle's elite mingled before the ceremony, the air buzzing with wealth and influence. Senators clapped backs with tech moguls while their bejeweled partners air-kissed and inspected each other's couture. Rook moved through the crowd with the controlled presence that had always set him apart. To an outside observer, he appeared every inch the proud father, impeccably dressed in his tailored suit, offering firm handshakes and appropriate smiles. Only someone who knew him intimately would notice the predatory awareness in his eyes, constantly tracking specific targets through the crush of bodies. Vivian floated among the guests in a champagne-colored gown that complemented her ash-blonde hair, now styled in an elegant updo. She played her role flawlessly, the gracious mother of the groom, the perfect wife of the distinguished Thaddeus Blackwell. When their paths crossed, she brushed his arm with practiced affection. "There you are, darling. I've been looking everywhere. Isn't it magnificent?" Her smile reached her eyes, a consummate performance. "Breathtaking," Rook replied, his voice pleasant. "You've outdone yourself with the planning." The Landrys sent their regrets. Food poisoning, apparently. "I've had the seating rearranged." She lowered her voice. "Barrett's offered to adjust the music selection since the original pianist canceled last minute. Such a lifesaver." "How fortunate he was available," Rook said, watching her face for any tell. There was none. "I should thank him personally." A flash of something, concern, warning, crossed Vivian's features. "He's quite busy coordinating with the string quartet. Perhaps later." From across the garden, Rook spotted Barrett Lancaster in animated conversation with the musicians. Tall, silver-haired, with the cultivated sophistication of old money despite his middle-class Boston origins. Rook had done his research during the drive over. Lancaster caught Vivian looking his way and gave a small, nearly imperceptible nod. "Dad!" Paige appeared at his elbow, resplendent in her maid-of-honor dress. "Liam's freaking out about his cufflinks. Something about them being lucky. He sent me to find you." "Duty calls," Rook said to Vivian, allowing himself to be led away by his daughter. In the groom's suite, Liam paced nervously, his groomsmen lounging with tumblers of expensive scotch. "Dad," Liam exhaled with relief. "I can't find grandfather's cufflinks. Madison's father gave me these." He held up platinum squares with tiny diamonds. "But I wanted to wear yours. For luck." Rook reached into his pocket and produced the box with the sapphire cufflinks. "I brought them just in case." As he helped his son secure them, their eyes met in the mirror. For a moment, all the tension between them evaporated. "Nervous?" Rook asked. "Terrified," Liam admitted. "Not about Madison, about living up to it all. Her family's expectations. Your legacy." Rook turned his son to face him. "Today is about you and Madison, nothing else." And Liam, he paused, choosing his words carefully. "No matter what happens in the future, remember that my pride in you is unconditional." Liam's brow furrowed slightly at the unusual sentimentality from his stoic father, but he nodded. "Thanks, Dad." The ceremony proceeded without a hitch. Rook stood tall beside Vivian in the front row, playing his part flawlessly. When Madison floated down the aisle on her father's arm, he noticed Liam's face transform with genuine love. Whatever game the others were playing, his son's emotions were real. During the reception, Rook circulated strategically, observing Vivian and Lancaster maintaining a careful distance that any intelligence operative would recognize as too studied to be natural. Twice, he caught them exchanging glances laden with meaning when they thought no one was watching. As dinner concluded and dancing began, Rook felt a presence at his shoulder. "May I join you?" A woman in her 40s with striking auburn hair and sharp green eyes took the empty seat beside him. She wore a simple black dress that stood out among the ostentatious gowns around them. "Diana Walsh." She introduced herself, offering her hand. "I believe you received my messages earlier." Rook's expression didn't change as he took her hand. "You've put me at a disadvantage. I've been your wife's assistant at the Arts Foundation for the past 3 years, Diana explained, her voice low. "I've watched her and Barrett conduct their affair under everyone's noses, using foundation resources and donor events as cover." "And your interest in exposing them?" Rook asked, his tone conversational, though his eyes were razor-sharp. "Barrett promised me the associate director position, then gave it to his college roommate once he had consolidated his power and your wife's influence. I've spent a decade building that program." She sipped her champagne. "But more importantly, I despise watching someone of your caliber being deceived. My father was military intelligence, Colonel Michael Walsh." Recognition flickered in Rook's eyes. "Mike Walsh was one of the best. He spoke highly of you. Before he died, he told me if I ever needed help, I could trust Thaddeus Blackwell. Instead, I'm helping you." She slid a small USB drive across the table. "Everything is here. Emails, hotel receipts, foundation funds they've misappropriated for their rendezvous, the offshore account they established in the Caymans, and the real estate documents. The province property is actually owned by a shell company Barrett created, not an independent seller. She doesn't know he structured it to remain solely in his name." Rook pocketed the drive. "You've been thorough. Oh, and the prenup she signed when you married. The infidelity clause is still valid." Her attorney tried to bury that detail in the divorce filing. Diana's smile was cold. "Barrett has convinced her that after the settlement, they'll have enough to live comfortably. He doesn't realize you could legally leave her with nothing if you move first." Across the dance floor, Vivian laughed at something Barrett whispered in her ear as they danced, maintaining the appearance of appropriate distance between foundation director and board member. "What's your endgame here, Diana?" Rook asked. "Justice," she replied simply, "and perhaps a position at Sentinel Solutions when this is over. I have skills your organization could use." Rook stood, buttoning his jacket. "We'll discuss terms later. For now, I need to dance with my wife." He crossed the floor with purpose, tapping Barrett's shoulder with genteel courtesy. "May I cut in? I've hardly seen my wife all evening." Barrett stepped back with practiced charm. "Of course, Mr. Blackwell. She's all yours." The irony wasn't lost on Rook as he took Vivian in his arms, leading her in a perfect waltz. For the first time that day, he allowed himself to really look at her, The woman he had loved for nearly 3 decades, the mother of his children, the architect of his destruction. "You're unusually quiet," Vivian noted, studying his face. "Is everything all right?" "I was just thinking about beginnings and endings," Rook said, his voice soft but penetrating. "Today, Liam begins a new chapter." It makes one reflective. Something in his tone made Vivian stiffen slightly in his arms. "You're not usually given to sentimentality." "Perhaps I'm evolving," Rook replied, spinning her under the twinkling lights. "People can surprise you, even after decades together." Fear flickered briefly in Vivian's eyes, the first genuine emotion he'd seen from her all day. But she recovered quickly, her social mask sliding back into place. "They certainly can," she agreed, her voice steady despite the sudden tension in her shoulders. As the dance ended, Rook brought her hand to his lips in a courtly gesture. "I've been thinking perhaps we should take a trip after all this wedding excitement dies down. Somewhere quiet where we can reconnect." Vivian's smile faltered for just a millisecond. "That sounds lovely. We'll discuss it tomorrow." "Yes," Rook agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. "Tomorrow will be a day for many discussions." He released her hand and turned away, already planning his next move. Behind him, he could sense Vivian watching his retreat, likely wondering if her carefully constructed house of cards was about to collapse. Rook made his way to where Cody Reeves stood vigilantly monitoring the perimeter of the reception. "I need a full workup on Barrett Lancaster and Vivian. Everything, financials, communications, movements for the past 5 years. Priority status. And I need legal to review my marriage contract." Cody, ever the professional, didn't blink at the unusual request. "Consider it done." "Timeline." "Yesterday," Rook replied, his voice hardening to the tone as operatives knew meant a situation had gone critical. "And Cody? This stays between us for now. My children deserve one day of happiness before the storm hits." As Liam and Madison cut their wedding cake, Rook raised a champagne in toast with everyone else. His smile never reached his eyes. In his mind, he was already 3 moves ahead in a game his opponents didn't yet know they were playing. Chapter 4: The Architect. The morning after the wedding dawned with Seattle's typical summer drizzle. Rook had spent the night in his study, reviewing the files Diana had provided and formulating strategy. When he heard Vivian stirring upstairs, he made a pot of her favorite French roast coffee, setting out 2 mugs on the kitchen island. A practiced opening gambit. Vivian appeared in silk pajamas and a cashmere robe, her face bare of makeup but still beautiful. For a moment, looking at her in the soft morning light, Rook felt a pang of what might have been grief in another man. "You're up early," she remarked, accepting the coffee he offered. "Did you sleep at all?" "Not much," he admitted truthfully. "It was quite a day." Vivian smiled, the practiced warmth not quite reaching her eyes. "Liam and Madison looked so happy. I think they're going to make it. Unlike us," Rook said quietly. The mug paused halfway to her lips. Her expression shifted from surprise to caution to resignation in the space of seconds. "How long have you known?" she finally asked, setting down her coffee untasted. "Does it matter?" Rook leaned against the counter, studying her. "What matters is what happens next." Vivian straightened, shifting into the negotiating posture he recognized from her years of boardroom battles. "I was going to tell you today." After the wedding seemed kinder. "Kinder," Rook repeated, the word like ice. "Like the kindness of planning your exit for years while I was building a life for us? Or the kindness of using our son's wedding as cover to flaunt your lover to our entire social circle?" Her face paled. "It wasn't like that. Barrett and I." "Save it." Rook cut her off. "I'm not interested in the romance novel version. I've seen the evidence. All of it. The accounts. The property. The meticulous dismantling of our life together behind my back. You were never here." Vivian's composure cracked suddenly. 28 years, Thaddeus, and you spent most of them in your hidden world of secrets and shadows. Do you know how many dinners I ate alone? How many events I attended as a single woman with a wedding ring? You gave me a house and financial security, but you never gave me yourself. So you found someone who would. Rook finished for her. Someone who appreciates art and beauty and doesn't carry the weight of the things I've seen and done for this country. I understand the narrative you've constructed, Vivian. It's cleaner that way, isn't it? Easier to justify. She flinched at his calm dissection. It wasn't planned. It just happened. Nothing just happens with you. Rook replied, his voice dangerously soft. You've always been strategic. It's what I admired about you. The offshore accounts, the property purchases, the legal preparations, those were all carefully orchestrated moves. Vivian's eyes widened slightly. How do you know about those? I know everything, Rook said simply, including Barrett's background before Seattle. Did you know he was forced out of the Boston Fine Arts Foundation after embezzlement allegations were quietly settled? Or that the province property is in his name alone, not jointly held as he's led you to believe? She shook her head, but uncertainty had crept into her expression. You're lying, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Barrett wouldn't. Check for yourself, Rook suggested, though I imagine those documents might mysteriously disappear now that I've shown my hand. He moved to leave the kitchen, then paused. By the way, I've instructed my lawyers to contest the divorce filing you've prepared. The prenuptial agreement you signed has an infidelity clause that you seem to have forgotten. Your attorney should have caught that. The blood drained from Vivian's face. You wouldn't. After 28 years, 4 of which were admittedly compromised, you wouldn't leave me with nothing. For years, Rook repeated, a hint of genuine emotion finally breaking through his control facade. 4 years of lies every morning and every night. For years of making me complicit in my own humiliation. Tell me, was there ever a moment of doubt, of guilt, or was I simply an inconvenient obstacle to your happiness? For the first time, Vivian seemed at a loss for words, her carefully constructed narrative crumbling under the weight of truth. The children, she began, will know everything unless you agree to my terms, Rook finished. I'm prepared to keep this civil and private if you cooperate. Otherwise, I'm fully prepared to ensure that everyone, including Liam and Paige, understands exactly who you are. What do you want? Vivian whispered. We'll discuss that after you've verified what I've told you about Barrett, Rook replied. Take the day. Do your research. Then we'll talk terms. He left her standing in the kitchen, her untouched coffee growing cold. In his study, Rook unlocked his secure laptop and reviewed the overnight reports from his team. They had been thorough, as expected. Barrett Lancaster's history was even more checkered than Diana had indicated. Behind the cultured facade lay a trail of financial improprieties and broken promises. 3 ex-wives, each left under questionable circumstances. Multiple foundation positions, each ended abruptly despite glowing public statements. But most interesting was the report on Barrett and Vivian's planned escape. The flights to France were real enough, but the associated banking transfers told a different story than the one Vivian believed. Barrett had been systematically moving funds from their joint planning account to his personal accounts over the past month. The villa purchase agreement, indeed, listed only his name, with no provision for adding Vivian later. Rook leaned back in his chair, the pieces falling into place. Barrett wasn't in love with Vivian. He was in love with the access her family connections provided and the financial security she represented. Once he had extracted what he could from her, history suggested he would disappear, leaving her with neither her lover nor her security. His phone buzzed with a text from Diana, Barrett in damage control mode. Called emergency meeting with Foundation legal team. Shifting funds between accounts. Rook smiled grimly. The game was moving faster now. By evening, Vivian had emerged from her room, her eyes red-rimmed, but her spine straight. She found Rook in his study and closed the door behind her. You were right, she said without preamble. About Barrett. About the property. About many things. Rook gestured to the chair across from him. Sit down, Vivian. Let's discuss how we proceed. For the next hour, they negotiated the terms of their separation with the detached precision of diplomats ending a long alliance. Rook's demands were simple. A swift, quiet divorce with financial terms that were less punitive than he could have legally enforced, but still left her with a much more modest lifestyle than she had planned. And what about Barrett? Vivian asked, her voice hollow. He's used the foundation. Don't you want revenge? Barrett is your problem, not mine, Rook replied. Although I would suggest you consider who else might have been damaged by his actions at the foundation. As for revenge, he paused, studying her face. I find it's more effective when people destroy themselves with their own character flaws. Vivian looked at him with something between fear and unwilling respect. You always were ruthlessly efficient. I forgot that about you. Yes, Rook agreed. You did. After she left, Rook made a single phone call to Cody. Proceed with Phase 2, he instructed, and arrange a meeting with Diana Walsh tomorrow. I believe she's earned that conversation about future employment. Then he poured himself 2 fingers of scotch and raised it in a silent toast to the shambles of his 28-year marriage. Chapter 5. The Deception. 3 weeks after the wedding, Rook sat across from his daughter Paige at their regular diner in the University District. These Sunday brunches had been their tradition since her undergraduate days, a time for father-daughter connections without Vivian's moderating presence. Dad, you're being weird, Paige said bluntly, setting down her coffee mug. With her razor-sharp intelligence and unflinching directness, she had always been his mirror image. Mom's staying at Aunt Carla's. You're suddenly renovating the master bedroom, and you both missed Liam's post-honeymoon dinner. Just tell me what's happening. Rook sighed. He could deceive foreign operatives and navigate international crises, but he'd never been able to lie to his daughter. Your mother and I are separating, he said finally. We're keeping it private until the terms are finalized. Paige's expression shifted from surprise to calculated analysis, so much like his own approach that it almost made him smile despite the circumstances. Mom's affair with Lancaster? She asked matter-of-factly. Now, it was Rook's turn to be surprised. You knew. Paige rolled her eyes. Dad, I interned at the foundation last summer, remember? They weren't exactly subtle. I almost told you a dozen times, but... She trailed off, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. But you didn't want to be the one to break your father's heart, Rook finished for her. Something like that, she admitted. Plus, I figured you probably knew already. You know everything. Not everything, apparently, Rook said, a hint of bitterness creeping into his voice. So, what happens now? Paige asked. With a divorce? With Lancaster? The divorce is being handled quietly. Your mother will be comfortable, but not wealthy. As for Lancaster, Rook paused. Let's just say the Foundation Board recently received some troubling information about financial discrepancies under his leadership. Paige studied him with shrewd eyes. You're planning something more, though. I can tell. I'm planning to move forward with my life, Rook replied evenly, starting with bringing in some new blood at Sentinel. I've hired Diana Walsh from the Foundation. She has an impressive background in financial investigation. Diana. Paige's eyebrows shot up. Mom's assistant? The one who knew everything about everyone. The very same, Rook confirmed. She's proved quite resourceful. Dad, Paige said slowly, please tell me you're not dating Mom's former assistant. Even for revenge, It's a professional relationship, Rook cut her off. But speaking of relationships, I understand your mother and Barrett are experiencing some turbulence. Something about misrepresented assets. A small, satisfied smile played at the corners of his mouth, the only outward sign of the careful plan he'd been executing for the past 3 weeks. Phase 2 was proceeding exactly as designed. Across town, Vivian sat in a small cafe with Barrett, their usual table at Cafe Louisa, now feeling exposed rather than intimate. The elegant confidence that had defined her for decades had dimmed, replaced by a wary suspicion that colored every interaction. The board has frozen my accounts pending investigation, Barrett was saying, his cultured voice tight with strain. Someone sent them documented evidence of financial improprieties, falsified expense reports, misappropriated donor funds, even suggesting I use foundation resources to fund personal travel. Our travel, Vivian corrected, watching his face closely. Barrett's hesitation was brief, but telling. Yes, of course. Our travel. The point is, I'm being systematically destroyed, and your husband's fingerprints are all over it. Ex-husband, Vivian corrected automatically. And Thaddeus doesn't leave fingerprints. If you're behind this, you'd never see it coming. Barrett's handsome face twisted with frustration. Well, someone is orchestrating my downfall. The Province property deal collapsed when the sellers suddenly received concerning information about my financial stability. My previous foundations have been contacted about my tenure there. It's a coordinated attack. Vivian sipped her tea, considering. What about the offshore account? The one with our... She paused, correcting herself. My settlement money. Again, that almost imperceptible hesitation. It's secure for now, but with my accounts frozen and legal fees mounting. You need money, Vivian concluded flatly. Temporarily, Barrett assured her, reaching for her hand. Just until this witch hunt concludes. I've built my reputation over decades, Vivian. I can't allow it to be destroyed by baseless accusations. Vivian gently withdrew her hand. I need time to think, Barrett. This isn't what I expected when I agreed to leave my marriage. Of course, he said smoothly, though she didn't miss the flash of calculation in his eyes. Take all the time you need. We've waited this long for our happiness. A little longer won't matter. As she walked to her car after their meeting, Vivian's phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. Ask him about Caroline Dempsey from the Boston Foundation. Ask about the missing endowment funds. Ask why he changed his name from Benjamin Lewis before moving to Seattle. Vivian stared at the message, her hand trembling slightly. She didn't need to ask who sent it. The methodical dismantling of Barrett's carefully constructed life had all the hallmarks of Thaddeus Blackwell's precision. Meanwhile, at Sentinel Solutions, Rook and Diana Walsh reviewed the latest intelligence reports on Barrett Lancaster. He's approaching desperation, Diana noted, scrolling through the surveillance photos showing Barrett's increasingly agitated meetings with lawyers, financial advisors, and former colleagues. The Foundation board meets tomorrow to discuss termination. His legal fees are mounting, and 3 different regulatory agencies have opened inquiries based on the anonymous tips they received. And Vivian? Rook asked, his face impassive. Growing suspicious, but still hopeful he'll provide explanations, Diana replied. She accessed the offshore account yesterday, only to find the balance significantly lower than expected. When confronted, Lancaster claimed emergency legal expenses. Rook nodded, satisfied. And the final piece? Diana slid a folder across the desk. Caroline Dempsey has agreed to fly in and meet with the Foundation board. She's bringing the original documentation of the embezzlement scheme Lancaster ran in Boston before he reinvented himself here. She was silenced with a settlement and NDA back then, but your legal team found a loophole. Excellent, Rook said quietly. Maintain surveillance, but no direct intervention. Let's allow natural consequences to unfold. Diana studied him with open admiration. You're destroying him without ever confronting him directly. It's impressive. I'm not destroying him, Rook corrected her. I'm simply creating the conditions for his true character to reveal itself. Barrett Lancaster has been running the same confidence game for decades, charming powerful women, siphoning resources, then disappearing when the walls close in. I'm just accelerating the timeline and ensuring Vivian sees his true nature before he can disappear with what remains of her assets. And your children? Diana asked carefully. How much do they know? Paige knows everything except my direct involvement. Liam. Rook's expression softened slightly. Liam and Madison return from their honeymoon tomorrow. He'll need to be told about the separation, but the details can wait until he's settled into married life. Diana nodded, then hesitated before asking, And your personal feelings in all this? 28 years is a long time to simply walk away without emotion. For a moment, Rook's carefully maintained facade showed a crack, a glimpse of the pain beneath the strategic exterior. My feelings are irrelevant to the operation, he said finally. I learned long ago to compartmentalize. The mission comes first, personal considerations second. And what exactly is the mission here? Diana pressed. Rook's eyes hardened to flint. Justice. Not revenge, justice. Vivian chose her path with open eyes. She'll face the natural consequences of that choice. Barrett manipulated and deceived her, using her as a means to an end while planning to abandon her once he'd extracted what he needed. He'll face more, comprehensive consequences. The coldness in his voice made Diana shiver slightly despite herself. Phase 3 begins tomorrow, Rook continued, his tone shifting back to operational detachment. Are the arrangements in place? Diana nodded. Everything's set. By this time next week, Barrett Lancaster won't exist, at least not in any form he'd recognize. As the meeting concluded, Rook remained at his desk, staring at the wedding photo of his family that still sat on his credenza. For just a moment, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of betrayal. Not just Vivian's infidelity, but the calculated cruelty of using their son's wedding as the backdrop for her final performance as his wife. Then, with the discipline of decades, he locked those feelings away and returned to the intricate architecture of Barrett Lancaster's destruction. Chapter 6. The Execution. The Foundation boardroom hummed with tense energy as 13 of Seattle's most influential arts patrons assembled for the emergency meeting. Barrett Lancaster sat at the head of the oval table, outwardly composed in his bespoke suit, though the tightness around his eyes betrayed his stress. Vivian sat 3 seats away, still a board member despite the awkwardness of the situation. Her face was a careful mask of professional concern, though her knuckles were white around her pen. I've called this emergency session to address the malicious allegations being circulated about my financial management, Barrett began, his cultivated voice steady. I assure you all, these claims are entirely fabricated, likely by competitors seeking to damage our organization's reputation during the critical fundraising season. The board chair, Eleanor Whitmore, adjusted her glasses. Before you continue, Barrett, I should inform you that we have a guest joining us. She gestured toward the door, where a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and impeccable posture stood waiting. This is Caroline Dempsey, former CFO of the Boston Fine Arts Foundation during your tenure there. The blood drained from Barrett's face so quickly that several board members exchanged glances. Ms. Dempsey is here under subpoena from the Washington State Attorney General's office, Eleanor continued, to discuss certain financial patterns she observed in Boston that appear to mirror concerning transactions we've identified here. This is outrageous, Barrett sputtered, rising to his feet. Ms. Dempsey signed a confidentiality agreement, which was voided when evidence of potential criminal activity emerged. Caroline interjected calmly, approaching the table. The NDA explicitly excluded testimony required by legal authorities, Mr. Lewis. Lewis? One of the board members looked confused. I thought his name was Lancaster. Benjamin Lewis was his name in Boston, Caroline explained, opening her portfolio. He changed it after the settlement. For the next 40 minutes, Caroline methodically outlined the sophisticated embezzlement scheme Barrett had run in Boston. Donor funds redirected through shell companies, inflated expense reports, fabricated vendor contracts with kickbacks. With clinical precision, she drew parallels to the identical patterns that had emerged at the Seattle Arts Foundation. Vivian watched Barrett's face throughout the presentation, seeing the charming cultural advocate she'd fallen in love with transform into a cornered predator before her eyes. When he caught her looking, he mouthed, "I can explain," with desperate eyes. After Caroline finished, Eleanor cleared her throat. In light of this information and the forensic accounting report commissioned last week, the executive committee has voted to suspend you immediately, Barrett. Security will escort you from the building, and you are directed not to contact any foundation staff or board members while the investigation proceeds. This is absurd, Barrett protested, his charm crumbling under pressure. You can't possibly. Additionally, Eleanor continued as if he hadn't spoken. The board has voted to freeze all foundation accounts pending a complete audit, and we've reported our findings to the appropriate authorities. Barrett's desperate gaze found Vivian. Tell them, Vivian, tell them this is a setup. Your husband is behind this. It's revenge for us for our relationship. The boardroom fell silent as all eyes turned to Vivian. Is this true? Eleanor asked sharply. Is your personal situation influencing these allegations? Vivian sat perfectly still, the practiced poise of decades in the spotlight, her only defense against the humiliation threatening to overwhelm her. In that moment of perfect clarity, she saw the complete picture. Barrett had never loved her. She had been a convenient mark, a wealthy, connected woman who could provide access to Seattle's elite and their money. The affair that had felt so passionate, so liberating, had been meticulously calculated to exploit her discontent and isolation. The future they planned together had been a mirage designed to keep her compliant while he siphoned away both her resources and the foundations. And Thaddeus had known, had orchestrated this moment of revelation with the precision that had always defined him. My personal situation is irrelevant to the financial evidence, Vivian finally said, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil. If Barrett has misappropriated foundation funds, that stands independent of any other matters. Barrett's face contorted with fury. You ungrateful bitch, he hissed, forgetting himself completely. After everything I promised you. Security, please, Eleanor interrupted, gesturing to the two men who had materialized at the doorway. As Barrett was escorted from the boardroom, still protesting his innocence and threatening lawsuits, Vivian remained seated, her back straight and her eyes dry. Only when the door closed behind him did she allow herself a single deep breath, the only outward sign of the earthquake that had just devastated her carefully planned future. Eleanor approached her after the meeting adjourned. Vivian, in light of the personal complications revealed today, perhaps you should consider a leave of absence from the board. It wasn't a suggestion. Vivian nodded once, gathering her dignity around her like armor. Of course. I'll submit my resignation today. Outside the foundation building, Vivian found herself standing on the sidewalk, suddenly untethered from the life she'd been building both openly and secretly for years. Her marriage was ending, her lover exposed as a fraud, her position in Seattle society suddenly precarious. Her phone chimed with a text message. I believe we need to revise our divorce terms in light of recent developments. My office, for PM. TR. Across the street, in an unmarked surveillance vehicle, Diana Walsh lowered her camera and picked up her secure phone. Phase 3 complete, she reported. Target has been removed from the foundation and is currently being processed by Seattle PD on preliminary fraud charges. Primary subject is isolated and appears to be in shock. Secondary subjects are reacting as anticipated. Understood, Rook's voice replied. Proceed to final phase. At precisely 4 p.m., Vivian arrived at Sentinel Solutions, escorted directly to Rook's private office by an impassive security guard. The space reflected its owner, elegant but utilitarian, with nothing extraneous or sentimental on display. Rook stood as she entered, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Gone was any pretense of the husband she'd known for nearly 3 decades. This was the Thaddeus Blackwell that foreign operatives and business competitors feared, calculating, precise, and utterly without mercy. You orchestrated all of this, Vivian said without preamble. It wasn't a question. I merely accelerated inevitable outcomes, Rook replied. Barrett Lancaster, or Benjamin Lewis, or whatever name he's using next, has run this con on wealthy, connected women across at least 4 cities. You were simply the latest target, and exposing him publicly, humiliating me in front of the entire board. That was just collateral damage. The bitterness in her voice was palpable. That was justice, Rook corrected her, for the foundation donors whose money he stole, for Caroline Dempsey, whose career he destroyed in Boston when she tried to report him, for the multiple ex-wives he left financially devastated. And yes, for me, the husband you planned to discard once you'd extracted your share of our life together. Vivian flinched at the coldness in his voice. So this is revenge, then? This is consequences, Rook said simply. Barrett is facing criminal charges for financial fraud. The offshore account you believe contained your future has been frozen by international authorities investigating his pattern of money laundering. The province property was never actually purchased. The funds were diverted to his personal accounts in the Caymans. Each revelation hit Vivian like a physical blow. And you're enjoying this, she whispered. I take no pleasure in your pain, Rook replied, and for a moment, she glimpsed genuine regret in his eyes. but I won't apologize for ensuring that both you and Barrett face the natural consequences of your choices. 28 years, Vivian. 28 years of partnership that you were willing to discard for a man who saw you as nothing but an opportunity. And what now? Vivian asked, defeated. You've destroyed both my planned future and my present. Is there anything left for you to take? Rook slid a folder across the desk. Revised divorce terms. I'm not without compassion, despite what you might believe. You'll retain the vacation house on Whidbey Island and enough financial support to live comfortably, if not lavishly. Your legal fees will be covered. In exchange, this ends here, quietly and completely. Vivian opened the folder, scanning the documents with the careful attention she'd always given to contracts. The terms were far more generous than she deserved, and they both knew it. Why? She asked finally, genuinely confused. After everything, why show any mercy at all? Because despite everything, you're still the mother of my children, Rook said simply. And because I choose not to be defined by bitterness, even when it would be justified. Something in his tone made Vivian look up sharply. There's something else. Something you're not telling me. A humorless smile touched Rook's lips. Always perceptive Vivian. Yes, there's something else. Barrett's financial crimes extend far beyond the foundation. Interpol has been building a case against him for years under various aliases. The information I provided was the final piece they needed. He'll be facing international charges once the local prosecution concludes. You're destroying him completely, Vivian realized. He destroyed himself. Rook corrected her. I merely ensured he couldn't destroy others after you. There were at least 2 other women he was grooming as potential marks, younger, wealthier women with even more social connections than you. The pattern never changes with men like him. Vivian signed a revised divorce agreement with a surprisingly steady hand. As she rose to leave, she paused at the door. Did you ever love me, Thaddeus? Truly. Rook met her gaze directly. With everything I had. That's what made your betrayal unforgivable. After she left, Rook sat motionless at his desk, allowing himself exactly 5 minutes to feel the accumulated weight of loss. The marriage, the trust, the future he believed in despite his natural skepticism. Then, with military precision, he compartmentalized those feelings and turned his attention to the final phase of his plan. Barrett Lancaster's destruction was proceeding on schedule, but it wasn't yet complete. And Thaddeus Blackwell had never been one to leave an operation unfinished. Chapter 7. The Confrontation. 1 month after the Foundation Board meeting, Barrett Lancaster sat in the visiting room of the King County Detention Center, the orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the tailored suits that had once been his uniform. His silver hair had dulled in the harsh fluorescent lighting, and the charm that had opened so many doors now seemed shabby and desperate. He straightened as the door opened, expecting his court-appointed attorney. Instead, Thaddeus Blackwell walked calmly to the table and took a seat across from him. You, Barrett spat, his cultivated accent slipping to reveal Boston working-class roots. You're behind all this. You've systematically destroyed everything I built. Everything you stole, Rook corrected him mildly. There's a difference. What do you want? Come to gloat. Barrett's handsome face twisted with hatred. Or just to see your handiwork up close? Rook regarded him with the detached interest of a scientist observing a specimen. I wanted to look into the eyes of the man who convinced my wife of 28 years that he loved her, all while planning to abandon her once he'd drained her resources. Professional curiosity, you might say. Barrett leaned forward, desperation evident beneath his anger. Listen, whatever your game is, we can make a deal. I have offshore accounts the authorities don't know about. Information that could be valuable to someone in your line of work. I'm not here to negotiate, Rook said, unruffled. I'm here to deliver information. The international warrant has cleared. Interpol will be taking custody next week. The fraud charges here in Seattle are just the appetizer, Barrett. The main course is waiting in Europe. 5 separate countries where you've left a trail of financial devastation under various aliases. For the first time, genuine fear flashed across Barrett's face. That's impossible. I was careful. Those identities were completely segregated. Indeed they were. Rook agreed. Benjamin Lewis in Boston, Barrett Lancaster in Seattle, Byron Landry in Chicago, Bernard Laurent in Paris. Impressive compartmentalization. Unfortunately for you, cross-referencing segregated identities is something of a specialty of mine. Barrett's face had gone ashen. What do you want from me? Nothing, Rook replied simply. Your fate was sealed the moment you targeted my wife. This visit is merely closure. She was unhappy, Barrett protested, a last desperate attempt at justification. She told me how you neglected her, how lonely she was in your shadow. I gave her what you couldn't, attention, passion, a future centered around her needs instead of yours. While systematically draining her accounts and preparing to disappear once you'd extracted maximum value, Rook finished for him. A con man's justification doesn't interest me, Barrett. Your pattern is established across multiple victims. Vivian wasn't special. She was just the next mark in your progression. Barrett's shoulders slumped, the last of his performative confidence evaporating. The great Thaddeus Blackwell, he muttered bitterly. She told me about your ruthlessness, your obsession with control. I should have known better than to cross a man like you. Yes, Rook agreed simply. You should have. As he stood to leave, Barrett called after him. She never loved you, you know. Not really. She stayed for the children, for security. Whatever you think you had with her was as much a performance as what she had with me. Rook paused, then turned back with a cold smile that made Barrett shrink involuntarily. The difference, Barrett, is that I never had any illusions about the transactional nature of our later years together. Vivian and I built something real once, something that created two remarkable children and decades of shared history. That it ended in betrayal doesn't erase what was genuine. He leaned slightly closer. But nothing you built with her was ever real. Your entire existence is a shell game, moving from one performance to the next. And now the curtain has fallen for the last time. Leaving Barrett staring after him, Rook walked out of the detention center into the bright Seattle afternoon. Diana Walsh waited beside his car, her efficiency as always a balm to his methodical mind. Is it done? She asked as he approached. The notification is complete, Rook confirmed. And our Interpol contact confirms the extradition hearing is scheduled for next Thursday. Will you attend? No, Rook replied, sliding into the driver's seat. I've spent enough time on Barrett Lancaster. We have more important matters to address. As they drove toward Sentinel headquarters, Diana reviewed the current operations on her tablet. Rook had promoted her to Director of Special Projects, a position created specifically to utilize her unique combination of financial investigation skills and strategic thinking. The children, Diana asked carefully as they pulled into the private garage. Liam is still struggling with the situation, Rook admitted. Madison's family is concerned about the social implications of the scandal, which puts additional pressure on him. Paige is more pragmatic. She's already adjusted to the new reality and is focused on finishing law school. And Vivian settled on Whidbey Island. Starting over, I imagine. Rook's voice was neutral, betraying nothing of his inner thoughts. Diana, I appreciate your concern, but my family situation is no longer relevant to our work together. She nodded, accepting the clear boundary he'd established. Of course, the Singapore client is waiting in conference room A. Their security breach appears more sophisticated than initially reported. Rook switched seamlessly into operational mode. The compartmentalization that had defined his career once again creating a firewall between his personal and professional lives. Later that evening, as Rook worked alone in his office, his secure line rang. The caller ID showed Paige's number. Dad, she said without preamble. I just heard about Lancaster's international charges from a law school colleague interning at the prosecutor's office. Your handiwork, I assume. Justice takes many forms. Rook replied, neither confirming nor denying. Mom called me today, Paige continued. She's different. Humbled, I think is the word. She asked me to tell you she's sorry, though she doubts you'd believe her. Rook absorbed this information silently. Did you have to destroy them both so completely? Paige asked, her tone more curious than judgmental. I didn't destroy your mother, Rook corrected her. I offered her dignity and security despite her actions. As for Lancaster, he paused. Some people are architects of their own destruction. I merely accelerated his inevitable downfall. The ruthless Thaddeus Blackwell, Paige said, with a hint of her usual sardonic humor. Remind me never to cross you. You're my daughter, Rook said simply. The rules are different for you. After they hung up, Rook sat in the quiet of his office, reflecting on the past 2 months. The systematic dismantling of his marriage and Barrett Lancaster's fraudulent empire had proceeded with the same precision he brought to every operation. Clean, efficient, comprehensive. Yet something remained unresolved, a loose thread in the otherwise immaculate tapestry of justice he'd woven. Liam. His son had retreated into silence after learning the full truth, canceling their weekly dinners and responding to messages with brief, formal texts. Unlike Paige, who processed emotion through analysis and direct confrontation, Liam internalized his pain, a trait he'd inherited from Rook himself. Picking up his phone, Rook made a decision. Some operations required a personal touch, even for a man who preferred to work through proxies and calculated distance. We need to talk, not about your mother or the divorce, about you and me. Dinner tomorrow, 7 p.m., the Overlook. Just us. Dad. The response came after a long pause. I'll be there. As Rook set down his phone, he allowed himself a rare moment of uncertainty. The calculated destruction of Barrett Lancaster had been a straightforward operation. Identify the target's vulnerabilities, apply strategic pressure, and watch the inevitable collapse. Rebuilding his relationship with his son would require different skills entirely. Vulnerability, emotional honesty, perhaps even admission of his own failures. Territory far more dangerous than any covert operation he'd ever undertaken. But Thaddeus Blackwell had never been one to retreat from a difficult mission, especially when the stakes were this high. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The Overlook restaurant perched on Elliott Bay, offering panoramic views of the Olympic Mountains and Puget Sound. Rook arrived early, securing a private table by the windows. The restaurant had been a family favorite for special occasions. Neutral territory where he and Liam might find common ground. Liam arrived precisely on time, his political instincts already well honed at 26. In his tailored suit with Madison's family's ancestral tie pin, he looked every inch the aspiring congressman that his in-laws were grooming him to be. Dad. He offered a handshake rather than the hug that would have been natural just months ago. Liam. Rook accepted the formality without comment. Thank you for coming. They ordered drinks, scotch for Rook, bourbon for Liam, and navigated preliminary small talk about the restaurant, the weather, Madison's adjustment to married life. The practiced ease of two diplomats circling sensitive topics. Finally, after their entrees arrived, Liam set down his fork and fixed his father with a direct stare. He said we needed to talk about us, not about Mom or the divorce. So talk. The bluntness was pure Vivian, Rook noted with ironic appreciation. For all Liam's physical resemblance to him, his emotional directness came straight from his mother. I owe you an explanation, Rook began, choosing his words with the care he typically reserved for operational briefings. Not about the collapse of my marriage, that stands on its own terms, but about why I've been distant throughout your life. Liam's eyebrows rose slightly. Clearly he hadn't expected this direction. I'm listening, he said, his tone neutral, but his body language revealing his interest. When you were born, Rook continued, I was still active in military intelligence. Your first 3 years, I was deployed more often than I was home. When I transitioned to the private sector, building Sentinel consumed my waking hours. He paused, taking a sip of scotch. Those are explanations, but not excuses. The truth is, I didn't know how to be the father you deserved. Because your own father died when you were 14, Liam supplied, demonstrating how closely he'd observed the father who thought himself unobserved. Partly, Rook acknowledged, but mostly because the work I did, both in the military and after, required a compartmentalization of emotion that became habitual. Keeping people at a distance was a survival mechanism that I never fully deactivated, even with my family. He met his son's eyes directly. Especially with you. Why especially me? Liam asked, the question holding decades of unspoken hurt. Because you reminded me of myself, Rook admitted, and I was afraid of what that might mean for your future. I saw my own capacity for coldness, for calculation, mirrored in you from an early age. I told myself I was giving you space to develop differently, but in reality, I was afraid of the influence I might have. Liam sat back, visibly processing this revelation. So, you kept your distance to protect me from becoming you? That's spectacularly misguided, Dad. I realize that now, Rook said with a hint of rueful acknowledgement. By trying to avoid imposing my nature on you, I denied you the guidance that might have helped you integrate the aspects of my personality you did inherit in healthier ways. Like the ruthlessness, Liam asked pointedly, the capacity for strategic revenge that you've demonstrated so thoroughly over the past 2 months? Rook nodded, accepting the implied criticism. Yes, those qualities have served me well in my professional life, but I understand they can be problematic in personal relationships. Is that why Mom turned to Lancaster? Liam asked, finally broaching the topic they'd been avoiding. Because of your emotional distance? That's a question only your mother can answer, Rook replied carefully. But I won't pretend I was blameless in the breakdown of our marriage. Vivian needed emotional connection, validation, passion, things I provided early in our relationship, but gradually withdrew as my work consumed more of my attention. But you didn't cheat, Liam pointed out, an edge to his voice. You didn't lie for years and plan to abandon her. No, Rook agreed, but I made my own choices that contributed to her unhappiness. The difference is that I accepted the consequences of those choices rather than seeking escape through deception. Liam took a long drink of his bourbon, then set the glass down with deliberate care. When I found out what Mom had done, what she was planning, I kept asking myself how I missed it, how I could have lived in the same house and not seen what was happening. We see what we expect to see, Rook said gently, especially with parents. They're our first understanding of stability in the world. When that foundation shifts, it's disorienting. Is that why you dismantled Lancaster so thoroughly? Liam asked, because he disrupted your foundation? Rook considered the question with unexpected honesty. Partly, but primarily because his pattern of behavior revealed him as a predator who would have continued victimizing others if not stopped. Your mother was one target among many for him, past and future. But you could have handled it quietly, Liam pressed. Protected the family reputation, kept it out of the papers. Instead, you engineered a public implosion. Madison's family is concerned about how it might affect my political future. Some cancers require aggressive treatment, Rook said unapologetically. Barrett Lancaster had been operating with impunity for decades because his victims were too embarrassed or too compromised to expose him publicly. Breaking that pattern required visibility. And Mom was just collateral damage in your mission? There was a hint of accusation in Liam's voice. No, Rook said firmly. I offered your mother a dignified exit with financial security, despite having legal grounds to leave her with nothing. The public exposure of Lancaster was separate from my handling of the divorce. Liam studied his father with new understanding. You compartmentalized them. Mom in one box, Lancaster in another. Clean, efficient. As I said, Rook acknowledged, it's a habit that has served me professionally but damaged me personally. Their conversation paused as the server cleared their plates. When they were alone again, Liam leaned forward. I need to know something, Dad. The text message that started all this, the one warning you about Mom's room. Who sent it? For the first time that evening, Rook looked genuinely surprised. You think I arranged that myself? Some sort of elaborate setup. The thought occurred to me, Liam admitted. It seemed too convenient. And you've always known everything happening around you. Not everything, Rook said with uncharacteristic weariness. The message came from Diana Walsh, though I didn't know that at the time. She had evidence of your mother's affair and Lancaster's criminal activities for months before she decided to act. And now she works for you, Liam noted. Convenient. She's exceptionally qualified, Rook replied simply. I recognize talent and integrity, regardless of how it enters my orbit. Liam nodded slowly, then asked the question that had clearly been weighing on him. Can you ever forgive Mom? Not take her back, but find peace with what happened. Rook was silent for a long moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. Forgiveness isn't in my nature, he finally said, but neither is prolonged hatred. I've extracted what justice I deemed appropriate. Now I'm focused on moving forward. He looked directly at his son, including rebuilding my relationship with you, if you're willing. I'm still processing everything, Liam admitted. And I'm angry. At Mom for her betrayal, at Lancaster for his manipulation, at you for your thoroughness in handling it all. But mostly I'm angry at myself for being blindsided by something that apparently everyone else suspected. Not everyone, Rook corrected him. Paige knew, but didn't tell either of us. And I, despite my professional paranoia, was genuinely shocked when I opened that door. A rare vulnerability showed in his expression. 28 years of marriage, and I never once seriously considered that Vivian might betray me that way. It was my personal blind spot. Something in this admission seemed to reach Liam in a way nothing else had. The realization that his formidable father could be blindsided, could be wounded, made Rook suddenly more human than he'd ever appeared before. I miss our Sunday breakfasts, Liam said after a moment, offering an olive branch. Madison's usually at her yoga class, then anyway. I'd like that. Rook replied simply, recognizing the gesture for the significant concession it was. As they finished their drinks, an unspoken understanding passed between them. Not forgiveness exactly, not from either side, but mutual recognition of the complicated reality they now inhabited and a willingness to navigate it together. Outside the restaurant, as they prepared to part ways, Liam asked one final question. Do you regret any of it, Dad? The way you handle things? Rook considered the question with genuine reflection. I regret the necessity, he finally said, but not the execution. Some situations don't allow for half measures or compromise. The Thaddeus Blackwell doctrine, Liam said with a hint of his old humor. All or nothing. A philosophy with professional utility but personal costs, Rook acknowledged. Perhaps not one to emulate in all aspects of life. As Liam drove away, Rook remained standing outside the restaurant, watching the lights of Seattle sparkle across Elliott Bay. For the first time since discovering Vivian's betrayal, he felt something like peace settling over him. Not happiness, that remained elusive, but the quiet satisfaction of a complex operation reaching its natural conclusion. Justice had been served. The loose ends being resolved. Life would continue, altered but intact. And if there was a hollowness beneath the strategic victory, a personal loss that no operational success could fully compensate for, well, that was simply the price of being Thaddeus Blackwell. Chapter 9. The Aftermath. 6 months after the wedding that had triggered the collapse of his carefully constructed life, Rook stood on the deck of his new waterfront home on Bainbridge Island, watching a winter storm roll across Puget Sound. The property was smaller than the queen and house he'd shared with Vivian, but its isolation and sweeping views suited his current state of mind. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, with surprisingly little acrimony once Vivian accepted the reality of her situation. She'd kept the Whidbey Island vacation home and enough financial support to maintain a comfortable, if modest, lifestyle. In return, she'd signed a comprehensive confidentiality agreement regarding both their marriage and Lancaster's crimes. Barrett Lancaster's story had ended with less dignity. Extradited to face charges in multiple European jurisdictions, he'd accepted a plea deal that would keep him in prison for at least 12 years. The extensive international coverage had ensured that his face and various aliases were now known to potential victims worldwide. His carefully constructed house of cards had collapsed completely, leaving nothing but ruins and cautionary tales. Sentinel Solutions had thrived under Rook's renewed focus, expanding into new markets across Asia and Europe. Diana Walsh had proven herself invaluable as Director of Special Projects, her unique combination of financial insight and strategic thinking complementing Rook's more tactical approach. Their professional partnership had gradually evolved into something more personal, though both maintained careful boundaries given the circumstances of their meeting. The door slid open behind him, and Diana stepped onto the deck with 2 mugs of coffee, bundled against the December chill in one of his sweaters. "Paige just called," she said, handing him a mug. "Her flight lands at 3. She's bringing someone from law school, a study partner named Miguel." She was very careful not to define the relationship. Rook allowed himself a small smile. "Interesting. She's never brought anyone home before." "Technically, this isn't home for her yet," Diana pointed out. "This is your new domain. The first holiday in new territory." He nodded, acknowledging the symbolic importance of the Christmas gathering he'd arranged. Paige had accepted the invitation readily. Liam and Madison had been more hesitant, but had ultimately agreed to come for Christmas Eve dinner, though they would spend Christmas Day with Madison's family. A political compromise that Rook understood perfectly. "Any word from Vivian?" Diana asked carefully, respecting the boundaries he typically maintained around the subject of his ex-wife. "She sent gifts for the children," Rook replied, "and a note from me, a formal apology, surprisingly sincere. I believe she's seeing a therapist on the island." "And how do you feel about that?" Diana pressed gently. Rook took a sip of coffee, considering the question with his typical thoroughness. "I find I have no particular feelings about Vivian's current life," he said finally. "Not vindictive satisfaction, not lingering resentment. Just neutrality." Diana studied his profile against the dramatic backdrop of the storm. "That's progress, I think. 6 months ago, you were still in operational mode, focused on the mission rather than processing the emotional impact. An occupational hazard," Rook acknowledged, "though one I'm working to address." This was true. At Paige's insistent recommendation, he begun seeing a therapist who specialized in military and intelligence veterans, someone with security clearance who understood the unique psychological challenges of a lifetime spent in compartmentalized thinking. The process was uncomfortable but not without value, particularly as he worked to rebuild relationships with his children. His phone buzzed with a text message from Liam. "Flight delayed due to weather, but still planning to make dinner. Madison's bringing her mom's famous apple pie. Hope that's okay." The casual domestic detail, so normal, so far removed from the strategic calculations that had dominated their interactions for the past 6 months, felt like a small victory. "Liam and Madison are bringing pie," he reported to Diana, who recognized the significance immediately. "Family traditions merging," she observed. "A good sign." The storm intensified, driving rain against the reinforced glass walls of the house. Inside, the massive Douglas fir they decorated the previous evening glowed with warm white lights, surrounded by carefully wrapped presents. Diana had brought a sense of lived-in comfort to the architecturally striking but initially sterile space, her touch evident in the cashmere throws draped over furniture and the collection of art books stacked on the coffee table. "I've been meaning to ask," Diana said, moving closer to share his sheltered corner of the deck. "Do you regret how thoroughly you dismantled Lancaster? You could have achieved justice with less comprehensive destruction." Rook considered the question, his gaze fixed on the churning waters of the Sound. "No," he said finally, his voice quiet but certain. "Some threats require complete neutralization. Lancaster wasn't just a man who had an affair with my wife. He was a predator who had spent decades targeting vulnerable women and leaving devastation in his wake. The pattern would have continued, if not decisively broken." "The ruthless Thaddeus Blackwell," Diana murmured, echoing Paige's frequent characterization. "Ruthless in specific contexts," Rook corrected her, "just as the surgeon's scalpel is ruthless when excising cancer. Precision and thoroughness aren't cruelty when they serve justice." Diana nodded, understanding the distinction he was drawing. "And Vivian? You were more merciful there." "Vivian made serious mistakes," Rook said evenly. "Her judgment was compromised by unhappiness and Lancaster's manipulation. But her actions, while personally devastating to me, didn't constitute the same pattern of predatory behavior. Different situations call for different measures of justice." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the storm gradually move eastward, breaks of pale winter sunlight beginning to pierce the clouds over Puget Sound. The metaphor wasn't lost on either of them. "We should prepare for Paige's arrival," Rook said finally, draining his coffee. "And I should wrap that last gift for Liam." Inside, as Diana moved toward the kitchen, Rook paused by his desk to check a secure notification that had just arrived on his laptop. The final report on Barrett Lancaster's assets had been completed, every account identified, every shell company unwound, every fraudulent transaction traced to its source. The document represented the official conclusion of Operation Checkmate, as Rook had privately coded the systematic dismantling of Lancaster's criminal enterprise. With a sense of finality, he digitally signed the acknowledgement and closed the file. From a drawer, he withdrew the small velvet box he'd been considering for the past month, a platinum pendant bearing a small chess piece, a rook. The symbolism might be too on the nose, but Diana's appreciation for strategic thinking suggested she would understand the significance. Christmas Eve seemed an appropriate time for new beginnings, for closing the chapter on revenge and beginning something built on more positive foundations. As he wrapped the gift, Rook allowed himself to acknowledge how dramatically his life had transformed in the space of 6 months. The betrayal that had threatened to destroy him had instead catalyzed a personal evolution. He remained the man he had always been, strategic, decisive, uncompromising in matters of principle. But he was learning to apply those qualities with greater discernment in his personal relationships. Justice had been served. Lancaster would never harm another woman. Vivian had faced the consequences of her choices, but retained her dignity and security. Liam and Paige were finding their way toward understanding the complex reality of their family's dissolution and reconstruction. And Rook himself had emerged from the crucible not unscathed, but unbowed, still fundamentally himself, but perhaps with greater wisdom about the application of his particular skills and temperament. The doorbell rang, signaling Paige's arrival. Setting aside the wrapped gift, Rook moved to welcome his daughter and meet the young man she deemed worthy of introduction. Behind him, Diana arranged a tray of appetizers, creating the warm domestic tableau that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. Life continued, as it always did, not unchanged, not unmarked by the storms that had passed through, but resilient nonetheless. And if the foundations of Thaddeus Blackwell's world were different now, built on harder-won wisdom and more carefully evaluated trust, perhaps they were all the stronger for having been tested by betrayal and tempered by justice. For a man who had never believed in second chances or forgiveness, Rook found himself surprisingly open to the possibility of new beginnings. Not with those who had betrayed him. Some breaches could never be repaired. But perhaps with those who had proven themselves worthy of the trust he now granted with far greater discrimination. The ruthless, unforgiving Thaddeus Blackwell remained intact at his core. But around that steel center, new growth had begun to emerge, not softening him, exactly, but adding dimensions that made him more than merely a weapon finely honed for justice. It was, he reflected as he opened the door to greet his daughter, enough of a victory to satisfy even him. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Jerome Benton adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror, watching as 7-year-old Aaron rushed past with his backpack trailing behind him. At 35, Jerome had built what most would consider the American dream. His cybersecurity consulting firm generated 7 figures annually. His house in suburban Denver sat on 2 acres of pristine land, and his family seemed picture-perfect. "Dad, Mom's making pancakes," Aaron called out, his voice echoing from the kitchen. Jerome smiled, walking toward the warmth of morning sunlight streaming through the windows. Roberta stood at the stove, her auburn hair catching the light as she flipped pancakes with practiced ease. She'd been doing this routine for 5 years now, ever since they'd married in a small ceremony that she'd insisted on keeping simple. "Morning, beautiful," Jerome said, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. Roberta leaned into him, but Jerome caught something in her reflection in the kitchen window, a tightness around her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Good morning, honey. I was thinking maybe I should finally do something useful with my time." "Useful? You raise our son, manage our home." "No, I mean productive for others." She turned in his arms. "I want to donate blood today." Jerome raised an eyebrow. In 5 years of marriage, Roberta had never shown interest in volunteer work or community service. She'd always claimed to be squeamish around medical procedures. "That's sudden. What brought this on?" "I saw an ad about the shortage. People are dying, Jerome. I have O-negative blood. I could help save lives." Something about her tone struck him as rehearsed, but Jerome dismissed the thought. Maybe she was just nervous about needles. "That's admirable. I'm proud of you." But as he watched her serve breakfast, Jerome's trained eye for patterns, honed by years of detecting digital security threats, picked up subtle anomalies. The way she avoided direct eye contact, the slight tremor in her hands, the forced brightness in her smile. "Actually," Roberta continued, setting plates down, "I already made an appointment for this afternoon. At Denver General's Blood Center." Aaron looked up from cutting his pancakes. "Can I come watch, Mom?" "No, sweetheart. It's better if I go alone. These things make some people uncomfortable." Jerome studied his wife's face. In his line of work, he'd learned to read people. Their digital footprints often revealed truths their words concealed. But Roberta had always been an enigma. No social media presence, few friends, no family she kept in touch with. She told him her parents died when she was young, that she'd grown up in foster care. He'd accepted it, never pushed for details. Now, watching her insist on donating blood alone, something felt off. That evening, Jerome worked late in his home office, analyzing network vulnerabilities for a Fortune 500 client. The irony wasn't lost on him. He made his living finding hidden threats, yet he'd never deeply investigated the woman sleeping beside him every night. Around midnight, he heard Roberta moving around upstairs. Concerned she might be in pain from the blood donation, he climbed the stairs to check on her. The master bedroom was empty, but light leaked from under their bathroom door. Jerome approached quietly, his instincts sharpened. Through the gap, he heard Roberta speaking in hushed tones on her phone. "It's done," she whispered. "Yes, I'm sure the blood is in their system now." "How long before?" 3 to 5 days. "Good. And you're certain this will work?" Jerome pressed closer to the door, his heart rate increasing. "No, he doesn't suspect anything. He's too trusting, too comfortable." "Yes, Aaron will come with me. We stick to the plan." The call ended. Jerome heard the toilet flush, clearly a cover for the conversation. He quickly retreated to his office, mind racing. What plan? Come with her where? And why was she so specific about the blood being in their system? Jerome spent the rest of the night researching blood donation procedures, DNA databases, and forensic applications. By dawn, he'd uncovered something chilling. Blood donations were routinely tested and cross-referenced against criminal DNA databases for identification purposes. Was Roberta afraid her blood would reveal something? Or was she counting on it? Chapter 2. The Envelope. 7 days later, Jerome was reviewing security protocols for a client when the doorbell rang. Through his office window, he saw an official-looking sedan parked in his driveway, alongside a police cruiser. His stomach dropped. Jerome opened the front door to find a middle-aged woman in a lab coat flanked by 2 uniformed officers. The woman's expression was grave, professional, but her eyes held something else. Urgency, maybe fear. "Jerome Benton?" she asked, checking a file folder. "Yes. I'm Karen Fleming from Denver General's Blood Services Division. These are Officers Andrew Peters and Derek McLaughlin with Denver PD. We need to speak with your wife, Roberta Benton." Jerome's pulse quickened, but years of handling corporate crises had taught him to remain calm under pressure. "She's not home right now. Is there a problem with her donation?" Karen Fleming exchanged glances with the officers. "Sir, where is she currently?" "Running errands with our son. They should be back within the hour." Jerome studied their faces. What's this about? Officer Peters stepped forward. Mr. Benton, we need to ask you some questions. May we come inside? Jerome's cybersecurity background had taught him about information warfare. Sometimes the most dangerous threats came from those who should be trusted. I prefer to know what this concerns first. Karen Fleming's composure cracked slightly. She glanced around, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. Mr. Benton, I'm going to be very direct with you. Pack your bags and leave the city with your son. Tonight. You don't want to know the reason, but she stopped herself, looking at the officers. I could lose my job for this. Ma'am, Officer McLaughlin warned. Jerome felt ice in his veins. What did you find her blood? Karen reached in her folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. Your wife's DNA sample triggered multiple alerts in our database. Federal alerts. I've never seen anything like it. She handed him the envelope with trembling hands. Sir, I have a brother who went down a dark path. I know what it looks like when someone's in danger. Get your son and go. The officers looked uncomfortable but didn't stop her. Jerome took the envelope, his mind racing through possibilities. How long do I have? They'll be here by tomorrow morning. Federal agents and probably others. Karen's voice was barely above a whisper. Others who don't wear badges. After they left, Jerome sat in his living room, staring at the envelope. Part of him wanted to wait for Roberta to confront her directly, but his analytical nature demanded information first. He opened it. Inside was a formal DNA analysis report and a criminal history profile that made his blood run cold. The woman he'd married, the mother of his son, wasn't Roberta Koch from Iowa. She was Elena Valdez, wanted in connection with an armored car robbery in Phoenix that left 3 guards dead. The crime had occurred 6 years ago, a year before he'd met Roberta. But that wasn't the worst part. The second page detailed her suspected associations with Bernard Hammond, a mid-level organized crime figure who specialized in identity theft and financial fraud. According to the report, Elena Valdez had disappeared with over $2 million from the robbery, money that had never been recovered. Jerome's hand shook as he read the final page, a note from Karen Fleming written in her own handwriting. Mr. Benton, I broke protocol to warn you because I've seen what these people do to families. Your wife's blood work also showed traces of a compound we'd never seen before, something that suggests she may have been systematically poisoning someone. The levels were consistent with long-term exposure. Please get yourself and your son checked immediately. And please run. K. Fleming. The room seemed to spin around him. Systematic poisoning. Jerome thought back over the past months. The occasional headaches, the fatigue he'd attributed to overwork, the stomach issues that had been getting worse. She'd been poisoning him. Jerome's phone buzzed with a text from Roberta. Stuck in traffic. Won't be home for another hour. Love you. An hour. He had an hour to figure out his next move. Jerome had built his reputation by staying 3 steps ahead of cybercriminals who thought they were smarter than everyone else. Now he needed to apply that same strategic thinking to a much more personal threat. He walked to his safe and retrieved the .40 caliber Glock he'd purchased years ago but never had reason to use. Then he sat down at his computer and began to dig deeper into Elena Valdez's past. What he found made him understand that this wasn't just about a criminal hiding in plain sight. This was about a predator who had specifically targeted him, his resources, and his son for reasons he was only beginning to comprehend. Chapter 3. Unraveling the Web. Jerome's fingers flew across the keyboard as he dove deeper into Elena Valdez's background. His cybersecurity expertise gave him access to databases and cross-referencing tools that most people couldn't navigate. What he discovered painted a horrifying picture of calculated deception. Elena Valdez wasn't just a bank robber who'd assumed a new identity. She was part of a sophisticated long-term fraud operation. Jerome pulled up property records, financial documents, and social media archives that revealed her pattern. She targeted successful men, married them under false identities, slowly poisoned them while gaining access to their assets, then disappeared after their deaths appeared natural. He wasn't her first victim. Court records from 3 different states showed similar cases. Harold Chun, a software engineer in Seattle, had died of natural causes at age 41 after marrying a woman named Sarah Mitchell. David Rodriguez, a real estate developer in Phoenix, had passed away from complications related to stress and overwork after marrying Jennifer Walsh. Elena Valdez had been both Sarah Mitchell and Jennifer Walsh. Jerome's blood ran cold as he calculated the timeline. Each marriage had lasted approximately 2 years. Each man had died after showing symptoms consistent with slow poisoning. Each widow had inherited substantial assets before vanishing completely. He'd been married to Elena for 5 years, longer than the others. Why? The answer came when he cross-referenced his business records with the timeline of their relationship. Jerome's cybersecurity firm had grown exponentially during their marriage, particularly after landing several government contracts. His net worth had increased from $2 million to over $15 million in 5 years. She'd been waiting for him to get richer. Jerome heard a car in the driveway and quickly minimized his screens. Through the window, he saw Roberta, Elena, getting out of her Honda with Aaron. They were laughing about something, Aaron carrying a bag from the toy store. His son, his innocent 7-year-old son who called this woman mom. Jerome's mind raced through scenarios. Confronting her directly would put Aaron in danger. Running, as Karen Fleming suggested, might work short-term, but Elena had connections to dangerous people. She'd find them eventually. No, Jerome realized he needed to be smarter than that. "Honey, we're home," Elena called out, her voice carrying that same false warmth he now recognized as calculated performance. "In here," Jerome replied, pulling up a work document on his screen to appear normal. Aaron bounded into the office first, holding up a new action figure. "Dad, Mom bought me the robot that transforms into a dinosaur." "That's great, buddy," Jerome said, pulling his son close for a hug that he held a little too long. The thought of Elena planning to take Aaron away, or worse, made his jaw clench. Elena appeared in the doorway, studying Jerome's face with eyes that he now saw were constantly analyzing, calculating. "Everything all right? You look tense." "Just work stress," Jerome lied smoothly. "Big client presentation tomorrow." She nodded, but Jerome caught her glancing at his desk, her gaze lingering on the closed envelope from Karen Fleming that he'd carelessly left visible. "What's that?" she asked casually. "Medical forms for my physical next week," Jerome improvised. "Dr. Martinez wants updated blood work." Something flickered across Elena's face. Surprise, then concern, then calculation. "Blood work? For what?" "Routine stuff. You know how doctors are." Jerome watched her reaction carefully. "Actually, I've been feeling pretty run down lately. Headaches, stomach issues. Maybe I should get checked out sooner." Elena's smile became forced. "I'm sure it's just stress from work. Maybe you should take a vacation. We could go somewhere, far away. Just the 3 of us." There it was, the beginning of her exit strategy. "That sounds wonderful," Jerome said. "Where are you thinking?" "Somewhere tropical. Maybe Costa Rica? I hear it's beautiful this time of year." Costa Rica, a country with no extradition treaty for many types of crimes. "I'll look into it," Jerome said. "But first, let me get this blood work done. I want to make sure I'm healthy before we travel." Elena's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Health first." That evening, after Aaron went to bed, Jerome sat in his office planning his strategy. He couldn't go to the police. Elena was clearly working with people who had resources to stay ahead of law enforcement for 6 years. He couldn't run without putting Aaron at risk long-term. But he could do what he did best: gather intelligence, identify vulnerabilities, and exploit them systematically. Jerome began building digital profiles on Bernard Hammond and his known associates. He traced financial patterns, communication networks, and operational methodologies. By 3 a.m., he'd identified something crucial. Hammond's operation relied on a specific money laundering process that moved funds through a series of shell companies before depositing them in offshore accounts. More importantly, Jerome had found evidence that the FBI had been investigating Hammond for months, building a RICO case that they hadn't yet been able to close due to insufficient evidence. Jerome smiled grimly. He was about to give them all the evidence they needed. But first, he had to survive long enough to see his plan through. because when he checked his coffee maker the next morning, he found a fine white powder that hadn't been there the night before. Elena had accelerated her timeline. Chapter 4. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. Jerome stared at the white powder, dusting the inside of his coffee maker, his hand hovering over the start button he'd almost pressed. The substance was barely visible. Anyone in a hurry would have missed it entirely. But Jerome's attention to detail, honed by years of identifying subtle digital intrusions, had saved his life. He photographed the powder with a macro lens, then carefully collected samples in small vials he normally used for collecting evidence of corporate data breaches. If Elena had accelerated her timeline, it meant something had spooked her. The blood test. She was afraid Jerome's medical examination would reveal the systematic poisoning. Jerome's phone buzzed with a text. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Pizza money on counter for you and Aaron. R. Working late. Elena had never worked a day since they'd been married, claiming she needed time to heal from her traumatic childhood. Another lie in a web of deception. Jerome realized this might be his chance to search the house while she was gone. He'd lived with this woman for 5 years, but had never been suspicious enough to look for hidden compartments or concealed items. After dropping Aaron at his friend's house for a sleepover, Jerome began a systematic search of his own home. In Elena's jewelry box, hidden beneath a false bottom, he found a burner phone. The recent call history showed dozens of communications with 3 numbers he didn't recognize. Using his cybersecurity tools, Jerome traced the numbers. One belonged to Bernard Hammond. The second traced to a man named Alfonso Hood, who had a criminal record stretching back 20 years. The third number led to a woman named Donna Vaughn, who appeared to be Hammond's current girlfriend and financial coordinator. Jerome accessed the phone's text messages and felt his blood turn to ice. Elena to Hammond. He's getting suspicious. Wants blood work done. Moving to final phase. Hammond to Elena. Too soon. We need another month minimum to clean the accounts. Elena to Hammond. Can't wait. He found something. Need extraction by Thursday. Hammond to Elena. What about the kid? Elena to Hammond. Problem solved permanently. Make it look accidental. Jerome's hands shook as he read the last exchange. They weren't just planning to steal his money and disappear. They were planning to kill both him and Aaron. The burner phone contained something else. Photographs of documents. Bank routing numbers, account passwords, digital keys to Jerome's cryptocurrency wallets. Elena had been methodically stealing his financial information for months. But the most chilling discovery was a handwritten note in Elena's real handwriting. J. Benton, timeline accelerated due to suspicion. Liquidate all assets by Thursday. Ensure no loose ends remain. B. Will handle disposal. Disposal. Like he and Aaron were nothing more than inconvenient ways to be eliminated. Jerome's analytical mind kicked into overdrive. Today was Tuesday. He had less than 48 hours before they planned to kill him and his son. He photographed everything on the burner phone, then carefully replaced it exactly as he'd found it. Elena couldn't know he'd discovered her plan. Not yet. Jerome spent the next hour installing hidden surveillance cameras throughout the house, using equipment from his office that was designed to catch corporate spies. If Elena was going to accelerate her timeline, he needed to document everything. At 11 p.m., Elena returned home. Jerome pretended to be asleep, watching through barely cracked eyelids as she moved quietly through their bedroom. She went directly to the bathroom and made another hushed phone call. "It's me," she whispered. "Tomorrow night." He suspects something, but he's trying to play it cool. "Yes, I'm sure. I found research on his computer about blood testing and poisoning symptoms." Jerome's heart hammered against his chest. She'd been monitoring his computer activities. "The boy is at a friend's house tonight. We can grab him after school tomorrow. Make it clean. No evidence pointing back to us." A pause. "Yes, I understand the risks. But $15 million is worth it. Plus his business contracts with the government. Those client lists could be valuable to the right buyers." Jerome realized with growing horror that this wasn't just about his personal wealth. Elena and her associates planned to sell his government cybersecurity contracts to foreign interests. They weren't just committing murder and theft. They were planning espionage. After Elena fell asleep, Jerome crept to his office and began implementing the plan he'd been formulating. If Elena thought she was dealing with just another trusting victim, she was about to learn otherwise. Jerome had spent his career staying ahead of sophisticated criminal hackers. Elena Valdez and Bernard Hammond were about to discover what happened when they tried to victimize someone who could hack back. He started by accessing Hammond's financial networks, using techniques that were technically illegal but absolutely necessary. Jerome identified the shell companies, traced the money flows, and began systematically documenting everything for the FBI file he was building. Then he got creative. Jerome planted digital evidence linking Hammond's organization to several unsolved crimes that he wasn't actually connected to. He created false communications that would lead investigators to hidden assets. Most importantly, he began systematically transferring the stolen money from his accounts back to secured accounts that only he could access. If Elena wanted to play a long game of deception and murder, Jerome would show her what a real strategic mind could accomplish. But as dawn approached, Jerome realized that outsmarting them might not be enough. Elena had murdered at least 3 other men. Hammond had connections to dangerous people who killed for much less than $15 million. Jerome was going to have to fight back in ways he'd never imagined. Chapter 5. The Trap Takes Shape. Jerome woke Wednesday morning to the smell of bacon and Elena's cheerful humming from the kitchen. The same performance she'd given him for 5 years, now revealed as the calculated behavior of a predator. He checked his hidden cameras from his phone and saw that Elena had been up since 5 a.m., cleaning and organizing with unusual thoroughness. She was preparing for their departure. "Morning, sleepyhead," Elena said as Jerome entered the kitchen. She handed him a cup of coffee with a bright smile. "You look better. Maybe you're finally getting over whatever was making you feel sick." Jerome accepted the coffee but didn't drink it. Instead, he took it to the sink and poured it out, feigning a sudden stomach issue. "Actually, I think I need to stick to water for now. My stomach is still bothering me." Elena's smile faltered for just a moment. "Of course. I hope you feel better soon." Jerome's phone rang, a call he'd been expecting. "This is Jerome. Mr. Benton, this is Dr. Martinez's office. We had a cancellation this morning. Could you come in at 10 a.m. for your blood work instead of next week?" "Perfect," Jerome said, loud enough for Elena to hear clearly. "I'll be there at 10. He'd arranged the call himself, using a voice actor from one of his client companies. Elena couldn't know that. "Blood work today?" Elena asked, and Jerome caught the slight tension in her voice. "Yeah, they had an opening. Might as well get it over with." Jerome studied her face. "Unless you think I should wait?" No. If you're feeling sick, you should definitely get checked out." Elena turned back to the stove, but Jerome saw her hands trembling slightly. At 9:45 a.m., Jerome left for his fake doctor's appointment. Instead, he drove to a secure location, a storage facility where he'd moved critical documents and backup equipment years ago as part of his disaster recovery planning. Jerome spent an hour transferring files to secured servers, documenting everything he discovered about Elena and her associates. He uploaded the evidence to multiple law enforcement databases using anonymous channels that would eventually reach the FBI task force investigating Hammond. But he also did something else, something that would have horrified his former ethical self. Jerome accessed Hammond's personal financial accounts and began transferring money to accounts controlled by Hammond's competitors and enemies. He planted digital evidence suggesting that Hammond had been stealing from his own crew. In the criminal underworld, such betrayal was typically met with swift and permanent justice. If Elena wanted to eliminate loose ends, Jerome would create some loose ends that would eliminate her first. His phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "How did the appointment go?" Jerome responded, "Still waiting for results. Doctor wants to run additional tests tomorrow. Says my blood work shows some abnormalities." The response came immediately. "What kind of abnormalities?" "Not sure yet. Something about toxin levels." Doctor seemed concerned. There was no response for several minutes. Then, coming home early. "Need to talk." Jerome smiled grimly. His fake medical crisis was forcing Elena to move even faster than planned, which would make her sloppy. He drove to Aaron's school and checked his son out early, claiming a family emergency. As they drove home, Jerome looked at Aaron in the rearview mirror. Innocent, trusting, completely unaware that the woman he called Mom was planning to kill him. "Dad, is something wrong?" Aaron asked. "You look scared." Jerome met his son's eyes in the mirror. "Aaron, I need you to listen carefully. Do you remember the safe word we talked about? The one for emergencies?" "Thunder," Aaron said immediately. "Good. If I say that word tonight, I need you to go directly to our neighbor Mr. Yang's house and call 911. Don't pack anything. Don't ask questions. Just run as fast as you can. Understand?" Aaron's eyes widened. "Is Mom okay?" Jerome's heart broke a little. Aaron would learn soon enough that the woman he thought was his mother was actually a stranger who'd been living among them like a parasite. "Mom will be fine," Jerome lied. "This is just a precaution." When they arrived home, Elena was waiting in the living room with 2 suitcases. Her friendly mask had slipped, replaced by something cold and calculating. "I've been thinking," she said. "We should take that vacation we talked about. Tonight." Jerome set down his keys carefully, his hand moving closer to the concealed pistol he now carried. "Tonight? That seems rushed. Your health scare made me realize how precious time is. I found us a flight to Costa Rica, leaving at midnight." Elena's eyes never left his face. "Already booked it. What about Aaron's school? My work commitments?" "Health is more important than work," Elena said. "Aaron can catch up on school later." Aaron looked between his parents, confusion clear on his face. Jerome could see that his son sensed the tension but didn't understand its source. "That sounds wonderful," Jerome said carefully. "But I'd like to wait until my test results come back." The doctor seemed really concerned about those toxin levels. Elena's mask slipped further. "What exactly did he say about toxins?" "He asked if I'd been exposed to anything unusual at home or work. Said the levels were consistent with systematic exposure over months." Jerome watched Elena's reaction. He wanted to test the whole family for similar exposure. Something flickered in Elena's eyes. Panic, then calculation, then cold resolve. "You know what?" Elena said, her voice suddenly bright again. "You're absolutely right. We should all get tested before we travel, just to be safe." Jerome felt ice in his veins. Elena had just agreed to something that would expose her crimes, which meant she had no intention of any of them living long enough for blood tests to matter. She was moving to the final phase tonight. Jerome glanced at the clock. 4:30 p.m. In less than 8 hours, Elena and her associates planned to murder him and Aaron. But Elena had made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated exactly how dangerous Jerome could become when someone threatened his child. Chapter 6. Endgame Approaches. As evening approached, Jerome maintained a facade of normal family life, while every nerve in his body screamed danger. Elena had been making subtle preparations all afternoon, packing items in ways that suggested she never intended to return, making hush phone calls when she thought he wasn't listening. At 6 p.m., Jerome received a text from an unknown number. "Package delivery at 9 p.m. Ensure recipients are home and prepared for pickup. Management." The message was clearly meant for Elena, sent to Jerome's phone by mistake. Bernard Hammond's crew was coming at 9 p.m. to pick up Jerome and Aaron. Jerome deleted the message and began his final preparations. He'd spent the afternoon strategically placing evidence throughout the house. Documents linking Elena to her previous identities, financial records showing the money transfers, and most importantly, communications between Elena and Hammond discussing their murder plans. When police eventually searched the house, they'd find a complete record of the conspiracy. At 7 p.m., Jerome suggested they order pizza for dinner. Elena agreed, seeming distracted by her own preparations. While she was in the shower, Jerome did 3 critical things. He activated all the hidden cameras he'd installed. He sent encrypted files to his lawyer with instructions to deliver them to police if anything happened to him. And he made a call to Roland Young, their elderly neighbor. "Mr. Young, it's Jerome Benton from next door. I need a favor, and I can't explain why right now." "Of course, Jerome. What do you need?" "In about an hour, I might need you to take Aaron for the night. If he comes to your door alone and seems frightened, please take him in and call 911 immediately." There was a pause. Jerome, are you in danger? I hope not. But if something happens, please remember that Aaron is innocent. He doesn't know anything about what's going on. I understand. We'll keep him safe. At 8:30 p.m., Jerome was helping Aaron with homework when Elena announced she needed to run to the store for travel supplies. She'd be back in 30 minutes. Jerome knew this was a lie. Elena was meeting with Hammond's crew to finalize their plans. The moment her car left the driveway, Jerome activated his contingency plan. Aaron, he said, kneeling down to his son's level, I need you to listen very carefully. Remember what I told you earlier about going to Mr. Yang's house? Aaron nodded, his eyes wide with growing fear. I need you to go there now. Tell Mr. Yang that your dad said, thunder, and that you need to stay there until morning. But Dad, Aaron, Jerome gripped his son's shoulders gently. I know you're scared, and I know you don't understand. But the most important thing you can do right now is go to Mr. Yang's house and stay there. Can you be brave for me? Tears welled up in Aaron's eyes, but he nodded. Are you going to be okay? Jerome hugged his son tightly, breathing in the scent of his hair, memorizing the feeling of his small arms wrapped around his neck. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we're both okay. But first, I need to know you're safe. Jerome walked Aaron to the back door and watched as his son ran across the yard to Mr. Yang's house. The elderly man was waiting at his door. He'd been watching from his window. Aaron disappeared inside, and Jerome felt a small measure of relief. Now he could focus on surviving the next hour. Jerome returned to his house and made final preparations. He positioned additional weapons throughout the rooms, kitchen knives, a baseball bat, a heavy flashlight. He double-checked that all the surveillance cameras were recording to cloud storage that Elena couldn't access. At exactly 9 p.m., a black SUV pulled into his driveway. Elena got out of the passenger seat, followed by 3 men. Even in the darkness, Jerome could see that one of them matched the description of Bernard Hammond. They thought they were coming to murder a trusting, unsuspecting victim. Jerome smiled grimly as he watched them approach through his security cameras. They had no idea they were walking into a trap set by someone who'd spent years thinking 3 moves ahead of sophisticated adversaries. Elena used her key to open the front door. Jerome heard her call out, Honey, I'm home. I brought some friends who want to meet you. Jerome stepped into the living room, his hands visible and empty, playing the role of confused victim one last time. Elena, what's going on? Who are these people? Bernard Hammond stepped forward, a tall, thin man with cold eyes and expensive clothes. Mr. Benton, we need to have a conversation about your wife. What about her? Jerome asked, injecting just the right amount of confusion into his voice. She hasn't been entirely honest with you, Hammond said with a predatory smile. Her name isn't really Roberta, and she's been stealing from you for quite some time. Jerome let surprise and shock play across his face. What are you talking about? Elena stepped closer, and Jerome saw she was holding a small pistol. I'm sorry, Jerome. I never wanted it to end this way. In what way? Jerome asked, backing toward the staircase as planned. We need your cooperation accessing some accounts, Hammond said. After that, we'll make this as painless as possible. Jerome had heard enough. These people had murdered others, planned to kill his son, and stood in his living room discussing it like a business transaction. You know, Jerome said, his voice changing from confused to cold, I have to admit something. I haven't been entirely honest with you either. Hammond frowned. Elena's grip tightened on her pistol. I've known who you really are for 2 days now, Jerome continued. Elena Valdez, wanted for multiple murders. Bernard Hammond, under federal investigation for organized crime. Alfonso Hood, wanted for kidnapping and assault. The third man, Hood, shifted nervously. Hammond's eyes narrowed. And here's the thing, Jerome said, reaching into his jacket. I've been recording everything you just said. Elena raised her pistol, but Jerome was already moving, diving behind the couch as he activated the signal that would bring help. The war for Jerome's life was about to begin. Chapter 7. The Wolf Reveals His Teeth. As Elena's first shot splintered the couch where Jerome had been standing, he rolled behind his leather recliner and activated the signal he'd prepared. Not to police, who might take too long to arrive, but to something much more immediate. Every light in the house suddenly blazed on, triggered by smart home automation. Simultaneously, speakers throughout the house began broadcasting the conversation that had just taken place, amplified loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. "We need your cooperation accessing some accounts. After that, we'll make this as painless as possible." Hammond's voice echoed from multiple speakers as exterior floodlights illuminated the yard like a sports stadium. "Elena, shut that off," Hammond barked. But Jerome had routed the audio system through encrypted servers. Elena couldn't stop it without access codes she'd never been given. "I've known who you really are for 2 days now." Elena Valdez, wanted for multiple murders. Bernard Hammond, under federal investigation for organized crime. Jerome's voice now broadcast their identities to everyone within 3 blocks. Alfonso Hood moved toward the stairs, trying to flank Jerome's position. But Jerome had spent the afternoon preparing for exactly this scenario. As Hood reached the 3rd step, his foot triggered a nearly invisible wire that brought down a carefully balanced shelf of heavy books. Hood stumbled backward, cursing and clutching his shoulder. "The bastard set traps," Hammond snarled. "Elena, you said he was just a computer nerd." "He is," Elena shouted over the continuing audio broadcast. "This doesn't make sense." Jerome used their confusion to move to his next position, the kitchen, where he'd prepared his most effective surprise. "You know what doesn't make sense?" Jerome called out from behind the kitchen island. 3 professional criminals walking into the home of a cybersecurity expert without doing proper reconnaissance. He popped up long enough to hurl a kitchen knife that embedded itself in the wall inches from Hammond's head. "You see, Elena," Jerome continued, his voice carrying a coldness that none of them had heard before. "You made one critical error. You assumed I was just another trusting victim." Hammond gestured for Hood to circle around to the kitchen's other entrance. But as Hood moved past the dining room, motion sensors triggered a cascade of falling objects. Everything from books to decorative items to Aaron's toy building blocks scattered strategically to create chaos and noise. "But I've spent my entire career hunting predators," Jerome's voice continued from the speakers. "People who hide in digital shadows, thinking they're smarter than everyone else. People exactly like you." Elena fired twice more at Jerome's voice, but he was already moving to his next position. From the pantry, Jerome called out, "Did you know, Bernard, that your financial records are currently being downloaded by FBI servers? Every shell company, every money transfer, every communication with Elena?" Hammond's face went pale. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Jerome's laugh was cold. "Elena, check your burner phone. See if you can reach Donovan." Elena fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking. After a moment, her face went white. "Bernard, it's disconnected. The number doesn't work anymore." "That's because," Jerome continued, "Ms. Vaughn was arrested about an hour ago. Seems someone provided federal agents with detailed evidence of her role in money laundering operations." This was actually a lie. Jerome hadn't been able to arrange Donna's arrest. But Elena didn't know that. Hood had finally made it to the kitchen side entrance. He kicked open the door, pistol raised, only to trigger Jerome's most elaborate trap. A thin wire released a bag of flour that exploded in Hood's face, temporarily blinding him. In the same instant, Jerome emerged from the pantry behind him. Years of staying in shape had kept Jerome stronger than his enemies expected. He brought a cast iron skillet down on Hood's gun hand, hearing bones crack. Hood screamed and dropped his weapon. Jerome kicked the pistol away and grabbed Hood in a chokehold. "Elena," he shouted, "drop your gun or I snap your friend's neck." "Don't listen to him," Hammond yelled. "He's not a killer." "You're right," Jerome said calmly. "Normally I'm not, but you threatened my son." Something in Jerome's tone made Hammond step back. Elena's hand wavered. "Here's what's going to happen," Jerome continued, tightening his grip until Hood started making choking sounds. "Elena, you're going to put down your weapon and tell me exactly where you've hidden my money." I can't," Elena stammered. "Wrong answer." Jerome applied more pressure. Hood's face was turning purple. "Offshore accounts," Elena blurted out. "Bernard has the routing numbers." Jerome looked at Hammond, who was calculating whether he could get a clean shot. "Bernard, You're going to give me those routing numbers, or I'm going to release the evidence I've gathered to some very interesting people. What people? Remember those competitors' accounts I transferred money to earlier? Turns out they're very interested in learning who's been stealing from them. Amazing how easy it is to forge communications in the digital age. Hammond's face went ashen. In the criminal underworld, being suspected of stealing from other criminals was a death sentence. You set us up, Hammond whispered. From the moment I found out who Elena really was, Jerome confirmed. Did you think you were dealing with some suburban husband who'd roll over and die quietly? Jerome released Hood, who collapsed gasping to the floor. But instead of helping his associate, Hammond raised his pistol toward Jerome. Maybe not, Hammond said, but you're still going to die tonight. That's when Roland Yang's voice called out from the front door. Police. The house is surrounded. It wasn't actually police. It was Jerome's elderly neighbor with a megaphone, following instructions Jerome had given him. But in the chaos and stress of the situation, Hammond hesitated just long enough. Jerome dove toward the fallen pistol as sirens, real ones this time, began wailing in the distance. The final act of Jerome's plan was about to begin. Chapter 8. Justice Served Cold. The approaching sirens weren't actually police. They were fire trucks responding to the gas leak that Roland Yang had reported as part of Jerome's contingency plan. But the sound was enough to rattle Hammond's already fraying nerves. As Jerome reached for Hood's dropped pistol, Elena made a desperate choice. Instead of trying to escape, she lunged toward Jerome with a knife she'd been concealing. If I'm going down, she snarled, you're coming with me. But Jerome had seen the knife's reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator. He rolled sideways as Elena's blade struck the kitchen floor where his head had been. Coming up in a crouch, Jerome grabbed a heavy marble cutting board and swung it like a club. The impact sent Elena sprawling backward into the dining room. Hammond tried to use the distraction to line up a shot, but Jerome was already moving. Years of playing racquetball had kept his reflexes sharp. He dove behind the kitchen island as Hammond's bullet shattered dishes in the cabinet behind him. This is over, Hammond, Jerome called out. The FBI has enough evidence to put you away for life. Then I've got nothing to lose. Hammond shouted back. But Jerome heard something in Hammond's voice that suggested otherwise. Fear, desperation, the realization that his carefully constructed criminal empire was collapsing. From his position behind the island, Jerome could see Hood try to crawl toward the back door. Elena was pulling herself upright, blood running from her nose where the cutting board had connected. You know what your real mistake was? Jerome asked conversationally, as if they were having coffee instead of a gunfight. You targeted someone with a son. Jerome emerged from behind the island, but not where Hammond expected. He'd moved to the far end, coming up near the kitchen window. Everything I built, everything I achieved, it was all for Aaron, and you threatened to take him away from me. Hammond spun toward Jerome's voice, but Jerome was already throwing another knife. This one caught Hammond in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his pistol skittering across the hardwood floor. Elena tried to grab Hammond's gun, but Jerome was faster. He kicked it away and stood over her, Hood's pistol now in his hands. It's over, Jerome said simply. Elena looked up at him with pure hatred. You think you've won? Bernard's people will hunt you for the rest of your life. Jerome smiled coldly. What people, Elena? The ones I've been systematically destroying for the past 24 hours. He pulled out his phone and showed her a series of news alerts he'd been monitoring. Alfonso Hood, wanted for questioning in 3 states. Bernard Hammond, federal warrants issued this morning. Donna Vaughn, arrested for money laundering. Your entire organization is finished. Elena's face went white. That's impossible. You couldn't have. I've had FBI cooperation since yesterday morning. Jerome lied smoothly. Did you think I'd face you alone? This was psychological warfare now. Jerome needed them to surrender rather than fight to the death in his home, where Aaron might eventually return. Hammond was trying to stop the bleeding from his shoulder. You're lying. If the FBI were involved, they'd be here already. They are here, Jerome said. They've been watching the house since this afternoon. They wanted to catch you in the act of attempted murder. On cue, Bright lights suddenly illuminated the front yard as 3 black SUVs pulled up. But these weren't FBI vehicles. They were unmarked cars that Jerome had arranged through a private security firm he'd worked with. The drivers had instructions to create the appearance of a law enforcement response. Elena looked out the window and saw armed figures in tactical gear surrounding the house. She couldn't know they were private security rather than federal agents. "Time's up," Jerome said. "Hands behind your heads, on your knees." Hammond looked around desperately, calculating odds. Hood was barely conscious. Elena was bleeding and surrounded. Outside, what appeared to be federal agents had the house locked down. "Don't even think about it," Jerome warned as Hammond's eyes moved toward the knife that had wounded him. "I'm not the same person you thought you were dealing with. I've learned some things about myself tonight." Something in Jerome's tone, a cold certainty, made Hammond's shoulders slump in defeat. "On your knees," Jerome repeated. "Now." One by one, they complied. Real police sirens were approaching now. Jerome's security team had called them as planned. In minutes, the house would be full of actual law enforcement with actual authority to arrest murderers. "Elena," Jerome said as they waited, "I want you to know something. Aaron is safe. He's been safe since before you got here tonight. Everything you tried to do to my family failed." Elena looked up at him with tears of rage and frustration. "I would have made you happy. We could have had a good life together." "You're a killer," Jerome replied simply. "You murdered 3 innocent men and planned to kill my 7-year-old son. There's no world where that ends with happiness." The front door burst open as police officers flooded the house, weapons drawn. Jerome immediately set down Hood's pistol and raised his hands. "Jerome Benton," one of the officers called out. "Are you injured?" "I'm fine," Jerome replied. "But I think these 3 could use medical attention before you book them for attempted murder." As Elena, Hammond, and Hood were handcuffed and read their rights, Jerome felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief. His plan had worked. Aaron was safe. The people who'd threatened his family were going to prison for a very long time. But he also felt something else, a recognition that he'd discovered capabilities within himself that he'd never known existed. When someone threatened his child, Jerome Benton had become someone capable of systematic, patient, devastating revenge. He hoped he'd never need to become that person again. But if he did, he now knew exactly what he was capable of. Chapter 9. New Beginnings. 3 months later, Jerome sat in the Denver FBI field office, reviewing the final paperwork in the case against Elena Valdez and her associates. Special Agent Karen Fleming, the blood bank worker who'd originally warned him, had been temporarily assigned to the FBI task force as a consultant. The grand jury returned indictments on all charges, Agent Fleming told him. Elena's looking at life without parole. Hammond got 25 to life. Hood took a plea deal, 15 years in exchange for testifying against the others. Jerome nodded, feeling a sense of closure he'd been waiting months to experience. What about the other victims? The men Elena killed previously? Those cases have been reopened. Elena's cooperation helped us recover evidence that had been overlooked originally. The families finally have answers. Jerome thought about those families. People who'd lived for years not knowing why their loved ones had died, never suspecting murder. At least now, they had truth, even if it couldn't bring their husbands and fathers back. "There's something else," Agent Fleming continued. "The Bureau wants to offer you a consulting position. Your methods for tracking financial crimes and cyber evidence were innovative." Jerome smiled wryly. "Innovative is a diplomatic way of putting it. You saved lives, Mr. Benton. Your own and your son's, obviously, but also future victims." Elena's pattern showed she was escalating, becoming more confident, more violent. She would have killed again. After leaving the FBI building, Jerome drove to Aaron's school to pick him up. His son had handled the aftermath of that night remarkably well considering. Jerome had been honest with him, age-appropriately, about what Elena had done and why she was no longer part of their lives. "She wasn't really my mom, was she?" Aaron had asked during one of their talks. "No," Jerome had replied. "She was someone who pretended to be your mom, but she never really loved us the way a real family member would." "But you love her?" Aaron had pressed. Jerome had considered this carefully. "I love who I thought she was. But that person wasn't real. Elena was playing a character, like an actress in a movie. Now, watching Aaron run toward the car with his backpack bouncing, Jerome marveled at his son's resilience. Children, he'd learned, were remarkably adaptable when the adults around them provided stability and honesty. "Dad," Aaron called out as he climbed into the passenger seat. "Guess what? Mrs. Peters says we're starting a unit on computer programming next week." "Is that right?" Jerome asked, pulling away from the school. "Interested in learning about computers?" "Maybe. I want to understand what you do for work." "Mrs. Peters says you help keep bad people from stealing information." Jerome glanced at his son in the rearview mirror. "That's part of it, yes. Could you teach me? I want to help catch bad people too." Jerome felt a complex mixture of pride and concern. Aaron's interest in justice was admirable, but Jerome hoped his son would never need to develop the darker skills that recent events had revealed in himself. "We'll start with the basics," Jerome said. "Computer programming, digital security, research methods. The rest, well, hopefully you'll never need the rest." That evening, Jerome was working in his home office when Aaron appeared in the doorway with a serious expression. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." Aaron sat down in the chair across from Jerome's desk, the same chair where Elena had once sat, planning their deaths. Jerome had replaced all the furniture from that room, but he'd kept this chair as a reminder never to be complacent about the people he trusted. "Were you scared that night?" Aaron asked. "When the bad people came to our house?" Jerome considered his answer carefully. "Yes, I was scared, but not for myself. For me, for you," Jerome confirmed. "I was terrified that something would happen to you before I could stop them." Aaron nodded thoughtfully. "But you weren't scared of them hurting you? Once I knew you were safe, I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry." Jerome looked directly at his son. "Aaron, there's something important I want you to understand. I never want you to have to do the things I did that night. Violence should always be the last resort. Only when someone is threatening the people you love and there's no other choice. But sometimes it's necessary." "Sometimes," Jerome agreed reluctantly, "but only when you've exhausted every other option and only to protect innocent people who can't protect themselves." Aaron was quiet for a moment. "Do you think Elena ever really cared about us?" This was the question Jerome had been dreading, but also the one he knew Aaron needed to ask. "I think Elena cared about what we could give her," Jerome said carefully. "Our money, our house, the security of our life together. But real love, the kind where you put someone else's happiness before your own, no, I don't think she was capable of that." "How can you tell the difference?" Aaron asked. "Between someone who really loves you and someone who's pretending?" Jerome thought about this for a long time. It was perhaps the most important question his son would ever ask. "Real love is consistent," Jerome finally said. "It doesn't change based on what's convenient or profitable. Real love means wanting the best for someone even when it costs you something. And real love is honest. It doesn't require lies or secrets to survive." Aaron nodded seriously. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. And that's real love, the kind that would make me fight the whole world to keep you safe." Later that night, after Aaron had gone to bed, Jerome stood in his backyard looking up at the stars. The house felt different now, cleaner somehow, as if Elena's departure had removed a contamination he hadn't even realized was there. His phone buzzed with a text from Agent Fleming. "Final update. Elena's been transferred to federal prison. She'll never be a threat to you or Aaron again. Sleep well. You earned it." Jerome deleted the message and put his phone away. He'd spent months looking over his shoulder, waiting for some remaining threat to emerge. But Hammond's organization had collapsed completely. Elena's other criminal contacts had either been arrested or fled the country to avoid association with the federal investigation. For the first time in years, Jerome felt truly secure. But he also felt changed. The man who'd lived in this house with Elena had been trusting, perhaps naively so. The man standing in his backyard tonight was someone who would never again accept